Hello, everybody. It's Tuesday, October the 1st, 2024. Happy October to all our listeners. Although some of us fear it's not going to be not a happy October, a happy November. Some people are thinking of the American election as liberal democracy's last stand against Donald Trump. And my guest today has a slightly different take on this. He's rather fearful of the future, but for different reasons. Barry Lynn is perhaps America's best known, most infamous antitrust activist, great critic of big media. He's been on the show before, back in 2020. He had a new book out back then called Liberty from All Masters, and he has a very intriguing new piece in Harper's Magazine, our friends at Harper's, this month. It's the cover story: Antitrust Revolution, Liberal Democracy's Last Stand Against Big Tech. Barry is joining us from Washington, D.C., where he runs the Open Markets Institute. Barry, are things that dire? Is liberal democracy on its last legs when it comes to big tech? Is that the big threat, not Donald Trump?
Well, it's both, and they intertwine. But anyway, thanks for having me today, and it's a great question, and it's an amazing moment because we are facing threats both from Donald Trump and from big tech that are entirely beyond anything that we have dealt with in decades, if not more than a century. In the case of, but at the same time, what we have is this sort of incredible revolutionary change that has taken place in how we are addressing the concentrated power of big tech, of Google, of Facebook, of Amazon. And this is in the United States, it's happening in Europe. And this is an unprecedented sort of period of enforcement of competition law, of antitrust. So we have this threat, but we have this fight that we're putting up. And, with a couple of breaks, we will finish this fight and we will win.
Well, you hope you win. You're not guaranteed, Barry, otherwise you wouldn't have written the piece. You seem to say that everything ultimately stems from the problems with big tech. And I'm quoting you from the piece. You say, look at almost every crisis in America today, and down the chain of causation, you'll find a monopolist, not just big tech, but they're, of course, your great enemy as monopolists. Inflation, shortage of drugs, the breakdown of supply chains, our industrial dependence on China, the cost of buying or renting a home or car, how far we must drive to a hospital or to find fresh produce, the cost of medicine, milk, and chicken, the vast growing inequality of wealth, political power, and control. Barry, how can we blame the cost of chicken on Google? I don't see the connection. I mean, some people might say, well, Barry's been an antitrust activist. He's the hammer. So everything looks like a nail to him. But I mean, what's the connection between?
No. This is, I'm talking about monopoly broadly. So that is sort of the monopoly problem in the United States, around the world. So, just a little bit of history. We for 200 years in the United States, we from 1776 until the early 1980s, anti-monopoly, the protection of open markets, the careful regulation of corporations, that's what we did. And we did it to protect our democracy. We did it to protect our individual liberty. And we did it to ensure that powerful financial actors were not ripping us off, just to ensure that the price of goods was determined in a competitive market. Everything changed in the early 1980s under Reagan. And so initially that was the consolidation of power in farming and agriculture and food, in retail. But eventually it got into the area of, because of this technological revolution, we've seen the carrying over of this monopoly reaction into the realm of big tech. So in that paragraph, I'm really talking about, sort of the broad effects. When we wake up in the morning and we look at our society, we say, why are prices so high? Well, if you're dealing with chicken, it's because of the consolidation among chicken
So
processors.
yeah, because I have to tell you, Barry, that my wife works for Google. So
Yeah.
when I come home and I see the price of chicken, I can't blame her on that, can I?
No, you can't blame her but when you actually see when it comes to sort of misinformation and disinformation and the sort of ability of journalists and publishers to sort of pay for their work, the independence of journalists, their ability to like really speak their minds, the ability of any corporation that is really dependent on Google for some kind of key services to speak their mind, then you're in a different
Well, how
world.
would that work, for example, with myself? I'm a podcaster, as you know,
Mhm.
you've been on the show.
Yeah.
I'm married to a Google executive, so I guess there's some control
Yeah.
over me. But how would Google affect Keen On? Why should I be so fearful of Keen On? I have who I choose on the show. You're on the show,
Yeah.
sometimes defenders of big tech, writers, broadcasters, filmmakers. I
Mhm.
feel pretty good. I mean, what's Google or any of these big tech companies done to me?
Well, I mean, we could just look at sort of maybe they haven't come yet for you, but what they have done is they've come for. Let's look at what they did in Canada. This was actually Facebook. So Facebook in Canada last year, the Canadians were saying, "Hey, you know what? You're not paying for the news that you're distributing," and so publishers are dying. So they said, here's a law that's based on some other laws that have been established around the world to get you to pay a fair price for the news that you're distributing, on which you're actually selling a lot of advertising. And so Facebook just shut down news across Canada at a time when there were all these crises,
Well,
these
how could
fires.
Facebook shut down news across Canada? What does that mean?
No links. You're not going to pass links on. They have actually they experimented this with this in California with American citizens, and this is because there was a bill in California to force Google and Facebook to pay for the news. Google and Facebook didn't want to do that, so actually Google also, in the case of California, experimented with just we're just not going to allow for one person to share a news a
It
link with
seems as
someone
if
else.
on that front, I mean, I'm not on Facebook, and I have to admit, I have a great distaste for the Facebook universe, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp. So I choose not to use any of them. I'm off it. I'm surviving. I mean, I guess you can't really be off Google as a search engine, but it seems as if they get it either way. Either they control it, which some people argue, or on the other hand, they choose not to have you on their search engine.
Yeah.
So it can't go both ways, can it?
Well, they can actually, and it can go. They control it, and they can. So they can boost what they want. They can boost who they want. They can actually sort of create, sort of favored treatment for certain corporations that work with them. If they do a deal with the New York Times, it's like, hey, you know what? You, the New York Times, you work with us in this way, and this way, and this way, and we will actually promote your
But
coverage.
isn't that capitalism, Barry? I mean, doesn't
No,
everyone have
that's
the
actually
right,
that's a
Facebook,
form
if
of
they choose to do a deal
no,
with?
that's not capitalism. That's called censorship. Because actually, if you promote one person, if you actually are an essential provider of services, if people depend on you for a large part or all of a certain kind of service, a certain kind of communications, if you favor one person over another person, the second person is being effectively censored. They're being downgraded. So what we're seeing though is often massive promotion of certain people over other people, and in some cases, straight up suppression of certain people. I mean, look at what's going
Who,
on in
for
X.
example, who's being suppressed?
Look at what goes on in X. So in X, you have straight up censorship of certain points of view. And the thing about this, what's great about X, what's great about our friend Elon Musk, is he's proud of this.
But X isn't. And I take your point, and I find X and Musk offensive as well. But X isn't a monopoly. If you can go on many other social media
Oh,
platforms.
actually, well, it depends. Actually, for the kind of communications that Twitter pioneered, going back to more than 15 years ago, There's really no other. I mean, we're starting to see it with Blue Sky is starting to emerge, which was, it's also Jack Dorsey, the same basic technology. So Blue Sky is starting to emerge, but for the 2 years since Musk took over took over Twitter, no, people actually they're abandoning Twitter, but they actually haven't been.
Well, I again, as a broadcaster, I have to disagree. I mean, I think that Substack is a very independent and interesting alternative to X in both in terms of its products and services and platforms.
It's a very different medium, in terms of what you're communicating.
Well,
so it's like you can, and again, it's like even with Substack, you're dependent on these folks sort of, not deciding to, engage in certain kind of business models, and it's like, I would encourage you to read the small print pretty carefully, because if, at the point, this is what people thought about Reddit 1.0, this is what people thought about Facebook 1.0, this is what people thought about Twitter when they got on it in the first place, is here's a place where I am in control. I get to communicate with who I want. I get to build my own network. And then one day, Facebook and Twitter, not with less success, but Google, all these organizations decided, hey, you know what? We're going to go to an advertising-based model. And what we're going to do is we're going to shift how you interact with other people. So rather than you interacting directly, we're going to determine who you talk to and how you talk to them. In the case of Google, a lot of this happens on search. It's like when you go searching for let's be honest, when you search for certain kinds of news, they can cook it the way they want to, and they do.
So you're saying it's all a bit of a conspiracy? I'm thinking of getting a divorce, Barry. I don't know if I can trust my wife.
So
are you suggesting that anytime anyone enters something into search, if I entered Barry Lynn into search, I did this for this show, that Google would be controlling things so that they would know exactly what comes up, and they would, given that you're one of their sworn public enemies, that they would setting me up against you or undermining you in some way?
Oh, there's a lot of different ways that they can squeeze you, which is exactly why, actually, if we have one of the great things that's happening right now, this is why I'm actually optimistic, is because we have two cases that the DOJ has brought against Google. One is a search case, and they won the search case. The search case.
This was back in August of this year. The judge, and I think you wrote this piece, although you weren't the judge confirms Google violated antitrust law by monopolizing online search. It's a pretty big deal, isn't it?
Huge deal. And the judge said Google is, quote, an illegal monopolist. And and one of the things that this opens them up to is the kind of regulation that we have traditionally applied to previous corporations, which is communications corporations, which is thou shalt not interfere in how people communicate with each other. It's like thou shalt not preference certain people and thou shalt not suppress other people. And so this is something that is a huge.
Yeah, Barry. The subtitle of your piece is "Liberal Democracy's Last Stand Against Big Tech," but we've been using the G word a lot. And my sense from your piece is that Google is, of all the big tech companies, at least in your mind, it's the biggest public enemy. Is that fair?
Amazon in different ways is has got a lot of power. And Amazon, one of the things we started working, the analysis that we developed about the platforms interfering in how people interact with each other, we developed looking at the way Amazon interfered with book authors and publishers on one side of the market and book readers on the other. And there we have ample, complete evidence of a corporation that interferes with the sale and the interaction between the author and the reader.
Can you be, Barry, can you be a big tech company and not be a monopolist? The company that comes to mind in that sense is Apple. I mean, they're the biggest of the big tech companies. I think they're still valued at over $3 trillion. Are they a monopolist, Apple?
Well, I mean, they do have 90% of certain, or close to 90% of certain markets, and they do have.
Which markets do they have?
The thing about a monopolist, here's a monopolist is a monopolist is a corporation that has the ability to and this is from Milton Friedman. So, this is not something that some lefties came up with. So Milton Friedman said a monopolist is a corporation that has the ability to set the terms of debate, the terms of commerce, within, of deals within a certain sector. And so by any measure, yes, absolutely, Apple has the power in everything from chips to apps to...
So by definition, if you're a $1, $2, $3 trillion company, by definition, it seems as if you're a monopolist because you're buying huge amounts of things.
It's not necessarily the price, and actually, and we should also be clear. It's like one of the things about, like, say, online monopolies. Monopoly itself doesn't need to be a bad name. Doesn't need to be a bad word. We, in the past, in the United States, have repeatedly regulated monopolies in ways that make them good, make them serve the public. So this is not the first time we've ever had communications monopolies. We had, when it was the telegraph, when it was the telephone, when it was, with AT&T, early wireless. It's like all these previous times you had different periods in what we now call the tech stack, which different levels that were monopolized, sometimes at the national scale, sometimes close to 100%. And you know what? We had a set of rules that we applied in every case. That we allowed us to sort of regulate those platforms to make sure that they were not being exploited to concentrate power and control. We're not idiots. We had, somehow we got through the first 250 years of this country, while, exploiting, making use of railroads and all these incredibly powerful new technologies. The first time in our entire history where we had nationally important, essential platform technologies that we did not regulate in this way is in this generation, and it's only online platforms. So even the internet itself is subject to regulations.
Are you saying, and right, the essay is everyone should read it. It's an excellent essay, very erudite. You know this stuff better than anyone. You would go back, you begin in 1609, not 1909, 1609 with James I of England, the ultimate wannabe autocrat. Is the foundations then of this antitrust argument you make against big tech, is it an American argument? Are you in the background? Is someone chanting USA here, Barry?
No, that's actually one of the main points I wanted to make here. Earlier, I said we went from 1776 to 1981. We had a particular approach to monopoly power, and and actually, if you want to talk about in terms of platforms, it was 1776 until 1996. We had a particular approach, and so 220 years. But the origins of that. The origins of those principles lie in sort of British history, English history, and in the sort of fights between Parliament, between the people of Britain in this early 17th century, when you had a king that wanted to concentrate all control in his hand, who had effectively concentrated all control in his hand and was proud of it.
This is James I, of course.
It was James I.
As Exhibit A. And that's what we don't want. And in a sense, you're arguing Google is the equivalent in the 21st century of James I.
Yeah, and actually, and we now Trump, and let's return to former President Trump. You brought him up early on. Now it's like I don't want to dismiss the potential problem of problems posed by a Trump presidency, because Donald Trump has said, "I want to be a dictator. I want to be in control. I want to concentrate all of the different levers in my own hands." We're going to take the government and we're going to use it to sort of achieve my vision. So in many ways, Trump is sort of acting in the tradition of King James. He wants to be a king a la King James. And we actually had recently in the Supreme Court, a case on just this issue in which the conservatives in the court said well, in certain ways, the president does exist above the law. And we had Justice Sotomayor say, we have, it's like, here we have the return of the king in American history. So this is a live issue in terms of the state, the concentration of power in the state the public state. But it's what I'm also making the case is that this is a case. This is also a problem in the private sphere when you are dealing with private corporations, private estates. So it's so you can have you can have the same problem in the public sphere and in the private sphere. And the worst thing of all is when these things come into union. When they
together.
Yeah,
I'm going to come back to that. I want to remind everyone that we're talking to Barry C. Lynn, the author of Antitrust Revolution. Fascinating new piece, the cover story of Harper's this month, Liberal Democracy's Last Stand Against Big Tech. We talked earlier, Barry. Barry and I talked about the dangers of these platforms, and he was slightly suspicious of Substack. He may be right, although I want to remind everyone that Substack is how we run Keen On. So people watching need to subscribe and, of course, pay me. Shouldn't be shy. All journalists, podcasters, videographers need to be paid. So Barry reminds everyone that the money can't just flow to Google or Facebook or Apple or even Substack. It needs to come to the creative class like myself. So I want to thank Barry for reminding everyone of that. Barry, you talked about this weird nexus between the interests of Trump as this wannabe dictator and the interests of big tech. Are they talking to one another? Is there a conspiracy here, or are their interests so oddly combined? Are there sort of weird synergies, almost a symbiosis between big tech and wannabe dictators like Trump and Vance? Vance, of course, is debating tonight Waltz.
Yeah, no, this is the key ultimate question is like because the origins of fascism was basically the merger. Like if you go in Italy and Germany in the 20s and the 30s, the sort of what you saw was a blending together of the power of corporations, private corporations, and the state. And once and you actually at certain points you don't even know who's really in control. Is it the person who is nominally head of the state, or is it someone behind that person? But you end up with, in most cases, absolute concentration of power on a level that is just completely terrifying, and we've never had to deal with this in the West. In the Anglo-American.
Are you suggesting that this danger in the 30s of this sort of combination of centralized authoritarian political power and private enterprise is now the specter looming over the West, or the United States at least?
Absolutely. I mean, it's like you see it in China. One of the things you've seen in China is you've seen a top-down, state-led imposition of controls over the big tech platforms. Now the state has the ability to use the big tech platforms to control individuals. But
it's a different system, China, isn't it? I mean, do you think that the top Google executives, the lawyers, the CEOs, are they talking to the Trump people? Is there some sort of conspiracy?
No? Actually, so here's the thing. I think that with I think that clearly Elon Musk is in much. He is talking on a day-to-day basis. He is in straight up alignment with Trump. He is, shamelessly, happily, sort of, campaigning for former President Trump. So there you see, a straight up alignment. In the case of Google right now, the Republicans, for the most part, remain very focused on sort of eliminating Google, because they saw Google and in different ways Facebook as corporations that were being used to serve, to repress their ability to speak with the public. So what you have is the Republicans. They're largely sort of going to. Our understanding is they will likely continue, if there's a Trump presidency, continue to pursue the cases against Google. Because there's a case against Facebook, there's a good chance that we'll continue to pursue that.
And you would support that. I know you're close to Lena Khan. You talk about that. You've been very the piece is very interesting in your embrace of Biden. You basically say the Biden administration has been the best one on this front
Yeah.
since the Second World War. So,
Yeah, but and here's the thing: is like there's different ways that you can sort of impose antitrust policy. You can use it to establish a rule of law, a fair rule of law that applies to all corporations everywhere. Same rules apply to Twitter, to X, as applied to Google. Same rules apply to Facebook. Same rules apply to how Amazon runs its commercial communications between, say, this, an author and a reader trying to communicate across the platform. You can have a set of rules that apply to everyone, and it works for everyone. Or you can actually sort of use the powers. You can try and sort of impose regulations on Facebook, regulations on Google that give you control over them. So my prediction is that what we would see under Trump presidency is, one, a straight up alignment between Trump and X, and then the attempt by Trump to basically bend Google and Facebook to his will. And so that will, at that point, you have a very difficult, situation for the people who run Google and Facebook. I actually don't believe that I really don't believe that I don't think hardly any of the executives in either of those corporations want to be a tool of either party. I am pretty confident that Elon Musk is an outlier when it comes to this kind of vision. But these people, because they don't want to accept traditional regulations, all the regulations that we have used for 400 years to ensure a foundation of democracy, because they're opposing that, they've opened the door to something that they don't want to see. So, right now, I would say if anyone from Google is listening, it's like, now's your time to go to the DOJ and say, you know what, maybe we really do have too much power. Maybe our business model really is bad for democracy. And maybe we should stop trying to fight for a business model that has actually disrupted American democracy to this level. They're putting their own selfishness, their appetite over.
Is there anyone at Google who you think captures this? I know that Kent Walker is very powerful there, or the CEO. I mean, the original founders and even Eric Schmidt, they're not there anymore. Are these just corporate tools, Barry? What is driving them?
Well, yeah, no. So Eric is no longer there.
And you had a bit of a run-in with Eric. You have a history with Google. You used to be at the New America Foundation, and then you had a big fight, and that's when you went off to found the Open Markets Institute. So some people listening might think, well, this guy just doesn't like Google.
No, what I like is democracy. I like the liberty of the individual. I like the ability of communities to sort of, people to make their own communities and speak with each other as they choose. And, I like people not, I want people not to live lives in which their thoughts and their actions are directed by super powerful corporations, which have studied everything they do, gathered these immense files on their lives, and they use that information to manipulate and exploit them. So I think, and we can have that. We can have a world in which the platforms serve us. They allow us to connect with each other. They allow us to make our own communities and to share information that we want with each other. We can have that. It's very simple. It's very easy. And I really think that most of the people inside of Google, of Facebook, of Amazon, this is what they want. This is what they, as human beings, as citizens of this country.
You mean this is Barry Lynn putting the senior execs on the couch and saying this is what you really want, or they're actually saying it?
I would say there's maybe a few people inside, who have gone over to the, I kind of like the license I have. I like being the richest person in the room, but it's like, all these people have children. They have to think about the effects on on democracy, on society. It's like, what kind of world do you want to live in? You want to live in you want the kind of breakdown that we're saying, or do you actually want to contribute to the reestablishment.
Right. So as you say at the end, it's in our hands. The first time in decades, this is what you argue at the end of the piece. We know how to beat back the vision of the autocrats and how to complete our renewal of liberal democracy. Now, not everyone will agree with your analysis, but let's say you're right. You talk about post-liberalism. You cite arguments about Patrick Deneen saying the real issue about post-liberalism is not a conservative critique, but liberals to recognize that they need to construct a new kind of post-liberalism. What needs to happen? Do these companies need to be broken up? I mean, even if you break up Google, if you had a search engine and you had YouTube, you still have the same business models. So do you need to regulate the kind of business models they have?
Yeah, so what antitrust is not just about breakup. Anti-monopoly, competition policy, what it also encompasses is regulation of monopoly. So we forget there's the Sherman Act, the Sherman Antitrust Act. It was passed at the federal level by Congress, signed by the president in 1890. 3 years before that was the Interstate Commerce Act. And so the Sherman Act sits on another piece of legislation. And the Interstate Commerce Act says when you have a network, like a railroad, in this case, it was a railroad. They said, when you have a network, here's the deal. Thou shalt not discriminate in how you treat people. Thou shalt treat everybody the same. That's the most important regulatory action that has ever been taken, because some monopolies, you can't break them up. They're networks. They need to be monopolies. So
are you suggesting then it should be illegal to be a network? If by definition a network is a monopoly,
no, not illegal.
You're against monopolies?
An unregulated network. We don't
what
want.
What would that mean, Barry? Explain. In your ideal world, in the future, if we've seized back our freedom, I'm assuming that there'll still be a Google search engine. What will that mean? What would you like to see?
Oh, the Google search engine, it would be, the algorithm would be open and people would be able to audit it. The people would be able to see, is it actually is the search engine serving my interest? When I search something, am I getting the search results that I want? Or am I getting the search results that Google has sold the rights to someone else to deliver to me? Is Google manipulating me through search to buy certain things from certain people? So
are you suggesting when I go to Google and I enter a search, there's a clear division between paid links and the algorithmic links? Are you suggesting that that's a fraud?
No, actually, I think there's what's happened is that even with the algorithmic links at this point, it's pretty much impossible, because their failure to, not just because of how they run their business, it's pretty much at a certain point you can't find the outcomes you want. You are being at every level your interactions are being manipulated to because Google has sold to someone outside of Google the control over their manipulation machine. So, one way to understand what Google has built, what Amazon has built, what Facebook has built is originally they were communications platforms. They allowed people to talk to each other, to share information with each other. But then they also have this ability to manipulate what you see and who you talk to. And then So what you're saying is that these platforms, Google, Facebook, they shouldn't be allowed to know you. They should forget everything that you do, so that when I go to Facebook or Google, it can't distinguish my habits, my tastes, my history from the tastes and habits and history of Barry Lynn. And we get exactly the same thing. You should be able to, as the user, there's many ways. There's actually models that are in place right now in Europe where it is the user who actually gets to control how much the platform knows about them. The user that has control over the dials. So, this is the thing. Does Google exist to serve us, or do we exist to serve Google? Does Facebook exist to serve us, or do we exist to make money for Facebook? So who is in control?
Barry,
Previous,
if
previous.
someone from Google was watching this, I'm guessing they would say, well, if you don't like Google, go to DuckDuckGo, use the Microsoft search. No one's
Yeah,
forced to
yeah.
use
So
Google.
it's
Well, how would you respond to that?
well, actually, the U.S. courts already said Google is an illegal monopoly in search. So
But how would you respond to
I don't have to say a damn
that
thing.
argument from within Google that everyone's free to go somewhere else if they don't like what
They
they're
made
doing?
that argument in a U.S. court, and they were found to be an illegal monopoly. So I don't have to say a damn thing about that anymore because the U.S. justice system said Google is an illegal monopoly in search. So
Yeah, but it wasn't a legal question. It was just a question that consumers have. Some think, some
yeah.
will agree, some will disagree, but everyone's free to go somewhere else. How would you respond?
Yeah, but it's like DuckDuckGo just sits on top of DuckDuckGo is basically just a platform that sits on top of the Bing database.
So
There.
Is
Yeah.
Bing a monopoly too? The Microsoft search engine?
Bing's got maybe 7% of the total.
So it is or it isn't a monopoly?
It's certainly if you have a duopoly, so you have a 90-10 split in the marketplace, that both sides have the ability to make a lot of money off of that, and there's
but you can make money and not, as you've acknowledged, you can make money and not be a monopoly.
Yeah.
I mean, Bing barely exists in
Yeah.
Europe. Google's much stronger, I think, in Europe than Bing. Sorry,
Oh,
then
and it's vastly stronger
Bing
in the
is much
United
stronger
States.
in the US than in Europe.
It's vastly strong. I mean, Google is 90+% pretty much everywhere.
So Barry, some people are going to be
China.
listening and thinking this guy's interesting, but he's kind of missed the boat because all I hear about these days is AI. Every show we seem to do is on AI. The real fear is of OpenAI. It's already a 1.5.
Yeah,
I think it's valued at over $1 trillion or close to it as a private company. Some people might suggest, well, the market is fixing this. You don't need regulation. You don't need antitrust.
great. Yeah.
How would you respond in two ways? Firstly, what's your take on AI? Is it more of the same? Is OpenAI just another version, essentially, of Google?
So AI is basically, we actually have if people want to go onto our website, Open Markets Institute, we have a great report on AI. It's actually shaped, our report has shaped policymaking in Europe and the United States. And our basic take on AI is pretty simple, which is that what it's doing is there's only 3 corporations that can really play at the highest level in AI, and it's Google, and it's Amazon, and it's Microsoft. And so they're the only ones that have the computing power, the cloud capacity, the platform power to really sort of make use.
You wouldn't include Anthropic in that?
Well, Anthropic is actually Anthropic's just like a little layer in there. It's a software layer, So OpenAI is just a software layer. But so these software layers, these little software layers, are being exploited by Google, Microsoft, and Amazon to further concentrate the power that the superpowers that they have, because they control so much of the.
So your analysis, which is actually, I haven't heard this one before. Your analysis is behind OpenAI are the dangerous trio of Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. And
the idea that OpenAI
is not a danger.
The idea that OpenAI is a competitor is absurd. I mean, it's like OpenAI is controlled by Microsoft. I mean, and they do.
How is it controlled by Microsoft? How is OpenAI controlled by Microsoft?
They own an extremely large percent of the corporation. They have a de facto ability to certainly veto any deals that OpenAI might want to do. They have a de facto control over OpenAI. So it's like they didn't want to own it directly because they, for a variety of legal reasons, they didn't want to own the liabilities, and they didn't want it to be a straight up obvious antitrust problem. So, but for all purposes, all intents, OpenAI is really pretty much controlled by Microsoft.
What advice, Barry, would you give media companies when they're dealing with OpenAI? Some have, so to speak, got into bed with them, like News Corp, Murdoch's organization, some German media companies. Others are suing them, like the New York Times. What advice would you give at Open
Well,
Markets Institute on
well,
for independent media companies of dealing with this new AI revolution?
yeah, I mean, let's be honest about what the New York Times is doing. They're just looking for a different price point. They're just looking for a bigger payoff, right? So
It's not a genuine
no,
attack
the
on
New York
open.
Times is not playing for a truly open system. The New York Times has had multiple opportunities to actually take on Google and Facebook and the platforms generally in ways that would, and I've had them on my stage. I had the CEO of New York Times and the CEO of News Corp on my stage promising the world, we're going to fight for an open a publishing system in America, one that is not controlled by Google and Facebook and Microsoft. And then 10 months later, Facebook comes and offers them a deal, and they said, "Give us the money, and to hell with
But
the
those are businesses,
hell with the public."
Barry.
Well,
Is
it's
there
there.
a moment in American history which you look back at with a degree of nostalgia? Your piece is very historical. We go back to James I. Because it seems to me as whenever you look back at American history, there's always been, whether they're monopolists or not is a legal question, but very powerful media figures, whether it's, the
Yeah,
Hearst Corporation or the New York Times or CBS or ABC. Is there a moment that you're more nostalgic for?
No, well, the thing here's just to be clear about what my problem with the New York Times is that the New York Times is like basically making itself servile to these large corporations. They're doing deals in which they're basically taking certain potential tools off the table. They won't even talk. They have never even published one article about any of the deals that they have done. To the credit of News Corp, the Wall Street Journal has actually kind of somewhat shamefacedly published articles about the deals they've done. So at least Rupert has the decency to say, yeah, I did a deal, but the New York Times won't even admit that. So yeah, what I look back to is a point where you had the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, CBS, you had 20 major publishing corporations and another 100 important publishers, and hundreds of smaller publishers around America who were all independent and who all spoke in their own names and were not afraid of any other corporation. That was democracy. And now we have the biggest actors, and this includes even groups like the BBC, which is paid for largely by taxpayers in the UK, who are afraid of the platforms because they have to ride the rails of the platforms to get their messages out. They can't do it without riding them. And the people who control those platforms can turn them off. They can turn them off anytime they want. So having a press, having the New York Times fearful, having Rupert Murdoch fearful, we don't want to live in a world in which Rupert Murdoch is fearful of what Google and Facebook and Microsoft can do
Rupert
to
Murdoch's scared. I mean, this is very chilling, Barry. Yes. I'm increasingly scared of my wife. If Murdoch's scared of Google, then I think we all should be. Finally, in all seriousness, Barry, some people are going to be listening to this and saying, yeah, maybe he has a point, blah, blah, blah. But America remains in a remarkably innovative and successful economy. It dwarfs the European economy, for example. I was just in the UK. The difference in wealth between the ordinary American and British citizen now is dramatically different over the last 20 years. The American economy is being driven by these big tech companies, for better or worse. How would you respond to that? And Europe, of course, has no big tech companies, which is one of the reasons why things in Europe are so economically dire.
America we have like a really truly innovative set of people, and the thing about like taking on these platforms, one of the things that we have seen,
they're driving it. They're the trillion.
No, they're actually, in many ways, they're restricting. So there's different kinds of innovation. There's innovation in which powerful corporations sort of adapt new technologies to serve their purposes, not your purposes, but their purposes, not the public purposes, but their purposes. That's what we've seen for 20 years. all of online commerce has pretty much been captured by like 3, 4, 5 corporations, and they're using this, like their innovations are designed to increase their power relative to every other corporation and relative to you and me and every other citizen. So that's a certain kind, we can call that innovation, and it's change. It's certainly change, but it ain't good change. It's bad change. We can have, we by really simple tools, really simple fixes, we can restrict the power of these corporations in a way that we can have good innovation. We can have innovation that serves our needs. We can move to a much, much better place, greater prosperity and greater freedom. We can have both.
Well, Barry Lynn, perhaps the most articulate and passionate critic of big tech, the antitrust revolution, and fascinating piece in this month's Harper's. Barry, we'll have to get you back on the show after the election. I assume you're voting for not Biden, that was a Freudian error, for Harris, although you seem slightly ambivalent.
No, I mean, well, I think it would be not ambivalent.
Well, we'll get you back on the show, Barry, afterwards, so that whoever wins the election, you can make the argument about defending American democracy against big tech. Thank you so much, Barry Lynn, author, Antitrust Revolution. A real honor.